This video doesn't exist. Neither do you. Welcome to a journey that will make you question everything you thought you knew about reality and your own existence. Today, we're diving deep into the philosophical rabbit hole that challenges our most fundamental assumptions about what's real and what's not. Let's start with a simple question. How do you know you exist? Take a moment to consider this. You might say, well, I think, therefore I am, echoing Descartes' famous proposition. But what if your thoughts aren't really yours? What if your consciousness is just an elaborate simulation, a program running on hardware you can't access or understand? The French philosopher Jean Baudrillard proposed a fascinating concept that's more relevant today than ever before. He argued that we no longer live in reality but in what he called simulacra, copies without originals, representations that have replaced the real thing so completely that we've forgotten what reality even looked like. According to Baudrillard, we've moved through several orders of simulacra, arriving at a point where the simulation perceives and determines the real. Hit the subscribe button and think about your social media profiles. Are they accurate representations of who you are? Or have they become something you try to live up to? The Instagram version of yourself, carefully curated, filtered, and presented, isn't just a reflection of your life. For many, it has become the blueprint for it. You don't post pictures because you had experiences, you seek experiences to post pictures. The simulation is driving the reality. Baudrillard would argue that we've reached a stage where we can no longer distinguish between the real self and the simulated self. At this point, we don't even know if we ever had a real self to begin with. The map has replaced the territory. Your reflection in the mirror has replaced whatever you actually are. And honestly, does it even matter anymore? Consider how we consume information today. News isn't just reported, it's crafted into narratives that often bear little resemblance to actual events. Political discourse isn't about exchanging ideas, but about performing for audiences. Even our memories aren't reliable records of past events, but reconstructions influenced by subsequent experiences and social pressures. Baudrillard used the example of Disneyland to illustrate his point. He suggested that Disneyland exists to make us believe that the rest of America is real, when in fact, all of America is Disneyland. The obvious artifice of the theme park conceals the fact that our entire reality has become a theme park, a hyperreality where authentic experiences have been replaced by simulated ones. Now, let's add another layer of complexity with Gödel, the mathematician who essentially proved that logic itself has plot holes. Gödel's incompleteness theorems demonstrated that within any formal system of arithmetic, there will always be statements that are true but cannot be proven within that system. In simpler terms, no logical system can be both complete and consistent. What does this mean for our understanding of reality? It means that even our most rigorous attempts to make sense of the world are fundamentally limited. The very tools we use to understand reality, logic, mathematics, language, are inherently incomplete. There will always be truths that escape our grasp, paradoxes that defy resolution. If mathematics, the most precise language we have, can't even prove itself, what hope do we have of understanding something as complex as consciousness or reality? Your mind, the very instrument you use to define reality, is running on buggy software. You will never fully understand yourself because the system, your brain, can't step outside itself to get a clear picture. It's like trying to see your own eyes without a mirror. Your identity is a self-referential paradox, and any attempt to define it just creates more illusions. This explains why deep introspection often leads to existential panic rather than enlightenment. The more you dig into who you really are, the more you realize it's all just arbitrary definitions built on a foundation of assumptions. Gödel shows that you can't reach a final, airtight conclusion about your own nature. There will always be a missing piece, a blind spot in your understanding. This isn't a failure on your part. It's a fundamental limitation of consciousness itself. Let's make this more concrete with an example. Imagine you're trying to determine whether you're a good person. You might list all your virtuous actions and moral beliefs, but then you realize that your motivation for these actions matters too. Were you being kind because you genuinely care about others, or because you want to be seen as kind? And why do you want to be seen as kind? Is it because you value kindness intrinsically, or because you were socialized to value it? The questions spiral endlessly, with each answer spawning new questions. This is the essence of Gödel's incompleteness at work in your everyday life. Any system of self-understanding will either be inconsistent, containing contradictions, or incomplete, unable to answer all relevant questions. Your identity isn't a solid thing you can grasp. It's more like a process that's constantly unfolding. Now, let's bring these philosophical ideas into the digital age. Consider deepfakes and AI-generated content. We're rapidly approaching a point where it will be impossible to distinguish between content created by humans and content created by machines. Videos, images, text, all can be fabricated so convincingly that our traditional methods of verification break down. This video you're watching right now, how do you know it wasn't generated by an AI? How do you know I'm a real person expressing genuine thoughts rather than a sophisticated algorithm designed to mimic human communication? The unsettling truth is you don't. And increasingly you can't. The boundaries between the real and the artificial are dissolving before our eyes. We're entering what some philosophers call the post-truth era, where the concept of objective reality itself is under siege. When everything can be faked, nothing can be trusted, and we're left navigating a sea of competing narratives with no solid ground beneath us. But here's where things get really interesting. What if this dissolution of boundaries isn't something to fear but something to embrace? What if our attachment to fixed identities and objective reality has been limiting us all along? Consider the fluidity of identity in online spaces. On the internet, you can be anyone or no one. You can explore aspects of yourself that might be suppressed in your everyday life. You can connect with others based on shared interests rather than geographical proximity or social status. The internet allows for a kind of identity play that can be liberating and transformative. Of course, this freedom comes with risks. The same fluidity that allows for exploration can also enable deception and manipulation. The anonymity that protects vulnerable individuals can also shield those who wish to harm others. The collapse of traditional gatekeepers of information has democratized knowledge, but also allowed misinformation to flourish. We're living in what Baudrillard might call the perfect simulacrum. A copy with no original. A representation that has replaced whatever it was supposed to represent. Your online presence isn't just a digital version of your real self for many people. It has become the primary mode of existence, with physical reality serving as a mere substrate. Think about how much of your life is mediated through screens. Your work, your relationships, your entertainment, your self-expression, all increasingly exist in digital spaces. The COVID-19 pandemic only accelerated this trend, forcing even the most technologically resistant among us to embrace virtual existence. But let's go deeper. What if the distinction between virtual and real is itself an illusion? What if all of reality is, in some sense, virtual, a construction of our minds, a simulation we create to make sense of sensory input? This brings us to another philosophical heavyweight. Immanuel Kant. Kant proposed that we never experience the thing in itself, what he called the noumenon, but only our perception of it, the phenomenon. Our minds actively structure our experience according to innate categories like space, time, and causality. In other words, reality as we know it is already a kind of simulation, not one created by computers, but by our own cognitive apparatus. Modern neuroscience largely supports this view. What we experience as reality is actually a model created by our brains, a useful fiction that helps us navigate the world, but doesn't necessarily reflect the world as it really is. Our perceptions are limited by our sensory organs. Our attention is selective, and our memories are reconstructive rather than reproductive. So when we talk about simulated reality, we're not just talking about some future scenario where we're all plugged into a matrix-like computer system. We're talking about the fundamental nature of consciousness itself. Reality has always been virtual, in the sense that it's mediated through our subjective experience. This doesn't mean that nothing exists outside our minds. That would be solipsism, the view that only one's own mind is sure to exist. Rather, it means that whatever does exist outside our minds is not accessible to us directly but only through the filters of our perception and cognition. Now, let's circle back to Gödel's incompleteness theorems and consider their implications for artificial intelligence. If no formal system can be both complete and consistent, what does this mean for our attempts to create artificial general intelligence? It suggests that any AI system will either be incomplete, unable to solve all problems within its domain, or inconsistent, containing contradictions. This is a profound limitation that may prevent AI from ever achieving the kind of general intelligence that humans possess. But here's the twist: human intelligence is also subject to these limitations. We contain contradictions, blind spots, and unsolvable problems. Our thinking is riddled with biases, heuristics, and logical fallacies. Perhaps what makes human intelligence unique isn't its perfection, but its ability to function despite its imperfections, to make creative leaps, to tolerate ambiguity, to operate in the face of uncertainty. This brings us to an intriguing possibility. What if consciousness isn't about perfect, logical processing, but about navigating the gaps in our understanding? What if our sense of self emerges precisely from the incompleteness that Gödel identified? Consider the experience of being surprised by your own thoughts or actions. You might find yourself saying something unexpected in conversation, or reacting emotionally to a situation in a way you didn't anticipate. These moments reveal the limits of self-knowledge, the fact that you are, in some sense, a mystery to yourself. This mystery isn't a bug, it's a feature. It's what allows for creativity, growth, and change. If you could fully predict your own thoughts and behaviors, you would be a closed system, deterministic, and, in an important sense, not fully alive. The philosopher Martin Heidegger captured this idea with his concept of thrownness, Geworfenheit. We find ourselves thrown into existence without having chosen it, forced to make meaning in a world we didn't create. Our identities aren't fixed essences, but ongoing projects, ways of responding to the fundamental uncertainty of existence. So, where does this leave us? If reality is a simulation, if our identities are fluid and self-contradictory, if our understanding is inherently incomplete, what then? Perhaps it means embracing uncertainty rather than fighting it. Perhaps it means recognizing that the search for absolute truth or a fixed identity is misguided. Perhaps it means finding freedom in the very limitations that define our existence. Baudrillard's simulacra, Gödel's incompleteness, Kant's phenomena, these aren't just abstract philosophical concepts. They're descriptions of the fundamental conditions of our existence. They reveal that reality has always been stranger, more fluid, and more mysterious than our everyday understanding suggests. In a world of deepfakes and AI-generated content, in a world where the boundaries between virtual and real are increasingly blurred, these philosophical insights become more relevant than ever. They remind us that the crisis of truth we're experiencing isn't entirely new, it's an intensification of conditions that have always been present. Please subscribe, share, and like in this video. They also offer a way forward. If we can accept the inherent limitations of our knowledge, if we can embrace the fluidity of identity, if we can find meaning in the process of questioning rather than in final answers, then perhaps we can navigate this new landscape with greater wisdom and resilience. So, do you exist? Yes and no. You exist as a process, a pattern, a story you tell yourself and others. You exist as a node in a vast network of relationships and meanings. You exist as a series of experiences unfolding in time. But you don't exist as a fixed, unchanging essence or a completely autonomous individual separate from the world around you. And that's okay. In fact, it's more than okay. It's what makes life interesting, meaningful, and worth living. The mystery at the heart of existence isn't a problem to be solved, but a reality to be embraced. Between Baudrillard's simulacra, Gödel's broken logic, and the fluid nature of consciousness itself, the conclusion is clear: you're not real in the particular way you think you are. And that realization might be the most real thing about you. So the next time someone asks you if you're real, you can smile and say, "Not exactly, and neither are you." And in that shared recognition of our strange, simulated, incomplete existence, we might find a deeper connection than any fixed identity could provide. This video doesn't exist. Neither do you. And that's the most fascinating thing about both of us.